Not that I've been counting, but it's been 10 days, 23 hours, 30 minutes, and 5 seconds since we last had news about DC Dual Force. Give or take 15 seconds or so because of how the YouTube scheduling system works. And during that time, I've made a bunch of different videos about DC Dual Force. As you can tell, I'm pretty excited about the game. But despite the frankly surprising amount of information we have about the game's core rules, the DC Dual Force team has only revealed 11 cards to us. DC has a massive library of awesome characters that DC Dual Force gets to pull from, but obviously they can't adapt every single character. I'm sure some of your favorite characters are going to miss out from being in the base set of cards, but we actually have a pretty good idea of at least 4 more characters that will launch with the game. These 4 characters are Joker, Aquaman, Cyborg, and Lex Luthor. The reason we know these characters are very likely in the base set of cards is because at the end of both the original trailer and the most recent trailer, we see a render of a bunch of different characters, including the 4 characters that I just mentioned, despite the fact that we don't have card designs for them. The rest of the characters on that screen are announced leader cards. So I suspect that Joker, Aquaman, Cyborg, and Lex Luthor are all going to be leaders. Now, truth be told, I suspect all leaders will eventually also appear as minions. For example, I don't think the Flash leader eliminates the possibility of a Flash minion. But for now, let's focus on the 4 remaining characters on this screen and talk about what they might look like as leader cards. This is all just speculation. This is all just for fun. Something for us to do while we wait for more news. Let's first go over Joker because we have the most information about him. First of all, Joker is referenced in the text of Punchline, but that's not the only example of Joker in DC Dual Force. He's also shown on the PvE mission screen that we see on the website. In this preview, we see that the player is playing Batman and Superman against the Joker in mission 1. But what I really want to point out is one of the modifiers that are in this mission, that modifier being Last Laugh. Last Laugh reads, at the start of your turn, shuffle 3 Joker Toxins into your deck. I do want to mention the formatting that they use on this screen. Specifically, I want to call out that Batman is bolded, where Arkham Inmate and Gadgets are not bolded. My interpretation of this is that Arkham Inmate and Gadgets are types of cards, rather than being specific cards. So there's not going to be a card called Arkham Inmate, there's not going to be a card called Gadget. There are going to be cards that are Arkham Inmates, and they're going to be cards that are Gadgets. Now, I think there's a good chance that Arkham Inmates and Gadgets are both token cards that aren't collectible, and maybe there is a card called Arkham Inmate, but it's not a collectible card, and it's just used in PvE. But for now, let's just say they're types of cards. Based on the fact that both Batman and Joker's Toxin are specifically named cards, I expect these to be not types of cards, but like an actual specific card with unique text. Possibly it could even mean that the card has to be collectible. Regardless, in this PvE encounter, Joker is shuffling those Joker's Toxins into the player's deck. So in this PvE mission, it's going to be all about using your resources efficiently, trying to win the fight as quickly as possible, and avoid drawing those Joker's Toxins at all costs. Obviously, we don't know what the downside specifically is for drawing the Joker's Toxins, but there's obviously some type of downside. And it wouldn't surprise me if we saw Joker's actual leader card be built around this concept. We've seen deck traps exist in other popular TCGs. Obviously, Legends of Runeterra has Teemo, and Hearthstone has the Iron Juggernaut and these types of cards. I'll try not to spend too much time on this, but I actually really like deck traps as concepts, so I want to spend a little bit of time discussing how I would handle a deck trap in this type of game. So this is just a concept. Don't expect this to show up in the final game. But here's my pitch for what Joker's Toxins could be. At the start of this turn, if this is in your hand, your leaders receive 1 damage for each copy of Joker's Toxin in your hand. Afterward, remove this from the game and draw a card. Meaning if the player has 1 copy of the card in their hand, they'll simply receive 1 damage on each leader. But if they have 2 copies of the card in their hand, they'll receive 3, because the cards would resolve independently of each other. At the time of the first one resolving, you would have 2 cards in hand, meaning you receive 2, and at the time of the second one resolving, you'll only have 1 in hand. Here's a quick chart of how much damage that would result in based on the number of toxins you had in your hand at the start of the turn. As you can see, 1 toxin on its own isn't very threatening, but the more you have in hand, the scarier each starting hand is. This separates Joker's Toxin from other deck traps that we've seen in other card games, and it's a bit more applicable in this game, because for those who don't know, the deck size in this game is 40, but drawing cards works a little bit differently in this game. You draw your 5 cards, you choose to play 2 during your turn, and then at the end of your turn, you'll draw a new hand of 5. That's why I built the at the start of your turn text into Joker's Toxin, is that way if you're in the middle of your turn and you draw a card, there's no downside to drawing Joker's Toxin other than the fact that, of course, you've drawn a card you're not going to play. You're not going to damage yourself by drawing Joker's Toxin in the middle of your turn, because the effect, the check that happens on the card, happens at the start of the turn. Now, I know we spent most of Joker's section talking about Joker's Toxins, but I will quickly close this out by saying I think Joker will obviously be an Anarchy leader. He'll definitely be an Anarchy card, but assuming he's going to be a leader based on what we said earlier in this video, I think it would be silly for him to not be the other Anarchy leader or another Anarchy leader. I mean, look at the Anarchy cards we've seen so far. We've seen Harley Quinn and we've seen Punchline, and Punchline has Joker in her text. So if Joker wasn't an Anarchy card, that would be very surprising. I expect his ability 1 to be one of the fairly basic ones, just give him some amount of attack, but I would want his ability 2 to be shuffling some of these Joker Toxins into the opponent's deck. Perhaps even you could tie some of the Joker Toxins to his attack if he successfully kills a target with his attack, or if he successfully damages the enemy leader, he adds a certain number of Joker Toxins to the enemy's deck. I think that would be a fun design for Joker. I wouldn't want to put too much Joker's Toxin generation on the leader card itself, just to give room to other cards to be able to also generate Joker Toxins. That might not be a design space that they want to explore, but if it is, you want to be able to give that room. But on the other hand, you also want to make Joker a big enough threat on his own that you need to deal with him early on. We'll move on to Lex Luthor. I think Lex Luthor will absolutely be a Tyranny card. It just makes sense. We haven't seen a Tyranny leader yet, so Lex Luthor would be the first Tyranny leader. The 2 Tyranny cards we've seen so far are what I would argue are fairly control-y cards, or at the very least Thin the Herd is. I'm not sure what I would do with Lex Luthor's card design, actually. Just because of the type of character that Lex is, there's a lot of different directions you can go. Maybe he upgrades cards faster because his whole thing is technology. He has his own, for lack of a better word, Iron Man suit. So perhaps maybe he can upgrade his own abilities rather than cards themselves. So maybe his basic attack starts off as something that just deals 2 damage or whatever, but over time you can build that up and get him even stronger and make him attack for significantly more power. I do kind of like the idea of Lex leading into that kind of upgrade strategy, but the only problem with chasing that aesthetic with Lex is that there's a lot of other characters that might fall into that category. In fact, one of the other characters, the very next character we're going to talk about, Cyborg, he's a character that could probably fall into that category as well. Honestly, I'm a little lost on Cyborg and Aquaman, which are the last 2 characters we're going to cover, so we're going to try to cover them simultaneously. I'm not sure which faction these 2 cards will fall into. So far, we've seen up to 2 leaders with every faction. We've seen Superman and Wonder Woman for Might. These 2 cards have already been announced and revealed. If we assume for a second that Joker is going to be a leader for Anarchy, we've seen 2 Anarchy leaders, well, quote-unquote seen 2 Anarchy leaders with Harley Quinn and Joker. So at least until we have a reason to believe this isn't the case, I'm going to assume that the starting game, the base game, has 2 leaders for each faction. With that in mind, we only have room in 3 factions, and one of the factions doesn't really make sense for either of the characters. We have room in Tyranny, we have room in Tactics, and we have room in Energy. I don't think Cyborg or Aquaman makes sense in Tyranny. Maybe Aquaman could make sense in Tyranny because he's like the leader of Atlantis, but I don't think of Tyranny when I think of Aquaman. So between Aquaman and Cyborg, I have to fit one of them into Tactics, and I have to fit the other one into Energy, but that's only because I'm assuming a lot of things about how many leaders we're going to get. If we're going to get 3 leaders for each faction at launch, well, this calculus gets thrown off quite a bit, right? If that's the case, then I would probably put Aquaman in Might, which would also kind of make sense because when I think of Aquaman, I think of someone who's quite physically strong, and he also commands an army, similar to Wonder Woman, who I think probably fell into the Might category for that same reason. She controls an army, Amazonians, and Might is, so far at least, a faction that focuses on buffing minions. So there's probably a lot of aesthetic overlap between what you want Wonder Woman to be and what you want the Might faction to be. Similar things can be said for Aquaman. Not only does he have his army to control, his Atlantean army, but also he's got obviously sea life that he could use potentially. Maybe sea creatures is an archetype in the game or something like that. Aquaman would very much be the commander of that army, so my first thought would be Aquaman in the Might category. But maybe they want to explore other design possibilities with Aquaman. And like I said, for this video, I'm assuming there's only going to be 2 leaders per faction, at least at launch, and then we'll get more leaders later on. And if I'm right about that assumption, well then Aquaman can't be in the Might category. Instead, I'm going to put Aquaman in the Tactics category. My current expectation, if you haven't seen my faction expression video, is that I believe Tactics will be a tempo class, and tempo classes are going to need access to minions. They're going to need access to ways to fight for the board, and Aquaman can very much be that. Whether we see other Atlanteans show up in the Tactics category, or whether we see sea creatures show up in the Tactics category, whatever it is, there needs to be some, I'll say, dump of minions into the Tactics category if it's genuinely going to be a tempo class or a tempo faction. And Aquaman might be the character to explore that area of the game with. And that leaves Cyborg to Energy, which makes sense, especially because Energy seems to be a fairly broad category. We've seen the Flash in Energy, and we've seen Dr. Fate in Energy, so the Flash being a speedster and Dr. Fate being a sorcerer. We have two very different types of energy in there. I don't see why Cyborg wouldn't fall into that category as well. Obviously, he has connections to the Mother Box, and then also he's smart and he has access to a bunch of technology. Originally, I thought, well, Cyborg should just go in tactics because he's obviously got a direct tie to technology, but if anything, his tie to technology feels almost energy-based because he communicates with technology in a way that regular humans don't. So if anything, it feels more mystical than it does intelligent, which I think was probably the aesthetic they're going for with tactics, I think. But maybe not. Maybe I'm off the mark on quite a lot of that. Like I said earlier in the video, I do think Cyborg could fall into that upgrade-centric gameplay style, trying to upgrade your cards. For people who don't know, there's a big level up and upgrade system inside of DC Dual Force. I actually just did a video on that yesterday, so if you're curious, you can go check that out. But Cyborg could artificially create, quote-unquote, upgrade ramp, upgrading cards that maybe you didn't use that turn, or maybe upgrading cards before you play them. Some type of upgrade system would make sense for Cyborg and the energy class as well. Or perhaps maybe Cyborg is tied to some type of charge ramp. I do think that there will be some type of charge ramp in the energy faction. For those who don't know, each and every turn you get one charge, which charge is what we use to cast our abilities, our leader abilities. As you can see, each leader has a printed cost value assigned to each of their abilities. You get one charge per turn. It would make sense if we had some type of way to ramp up that charge. Cyborg might be the card to do that. With that being said, I don't think a leader is the best source of charge generation, so perhaps maybe the Cyborg minion could do something like that, or another minion could do something like that. Instead, I would probably lean Cyborg more into that upgrade territory where we're upgrading our cards rather than our current charge value. All right, those are some of my thoughts on the unreleased or unannounced cards so far. Again, running through that list, we have Joker, Aquaman, Cyborg, and Lex Luthor. Of these quote-unquote unannounced cards, which are you most excited about? I'm excited to learn about Joker because A, I think he will end up with that deck trap mechanic, and I'm a big fan of deck trap mechanics. I played a lot of Iron Juggernaut before it was good, and I played Teemo quite a bit in LOR as well. But also, I'm really interested in Anarchy as a faction in general. I'm really high on Harley Quinn right now. I think her card looks fantastic, and I dramatically underestimated how good Punchline is, especially if Joker ends up being a leader and you can just get that condition more or less for free. Yeah, let me know what you think, but I'm going to wrap it up now. Thank you so much for watching. Keep being awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.